Let's get started. So this live stream is going to be about showing that you've risen to the top of your field. And I think it's the misunderstanding of what this actually means that drives a lot of low quality profile building and leads to just activities that don't make sense for people's profiles. So let's go back to what it means to rise to the top of your field. A lot of people think that it means to show that they fit some sort of archetype that USCIS definitely has in regards to what their profile should look like, that there's some sort of rubric that is followed for each field, that you have to look a certain way to have your profile count towards this sort of evidentiary standard, but the reality is that is not the case. What is probably going to be the case is that the officer will not have worked in your field and will therefore not really have this archetype in mind, that there's no rubric as well that they follow in regards to what your profile should look like. And as a result, you don't really, there's no archetype that once you follow will automatically mean that you're risen to the top of your field. How you should be thinking about how you've risen to the top of your field is in thinking about how your profile makes sense to someone else in your field, and also someone who's never worked in your field. What you want to focus on is really just the strength of your argument that you've risen to the top of your field. And how you make that argument is through a narrative, a case narrative. So you have to tell the story of how you are now at the top of your field. And how you can do that is by showing progression, a continual thread of expertise, perhaps starting with your first few years in your industry and slowly accumulating a record of significant outcomes for maybe several top US companies, for several top companies in general, maybe outside of the US. You have to show this continuity. And that's one element of showing how you've risen to the top of your field, that you have just continued to compound the outcomes you have created through your work. So that is one way to show that you've risen to the top of your field. And then you also want to show comparative significance, especially comparative significance of your work. And that comes from building the contextual narrative around what you've done. So if what you've done is so outstanding, you have to be able to establish that through not just explaining your work in regards to how it compares to other work in your field, other similar work, but also through reference letters that don't just make these affirmative statements about your work, but actually provide the context that's needed. For example, if you recruit an expert to talk about your work, they could say, I have 20 years or 30 years of experience in this field, and I have never seen this kind of work being done in this certain way, and that is why this person has risen to the top of their field. That can count as evidence in itself. And that is how you want to establish that you've risen to the top of your field. So notice that I didn't say certain things like do certain activities or fit some sort of archetype or check this box and you're automatically going to show that you've risen to the top of your field. It is not about that. It is about having a case narrative that makes sense, not just to people in your field, but also people who have never worked in your field who can, by unpacking your argument, understand how it is that you've risen to the top of your field on a comparative level, on a relative level. That is what you want to be showing. So I think that should clear up a lot of misconceptions about how to build this argument. One of the most common misconceptions, I think, is to force a niche to identify some really narrow field that may actually have nothing to do or may only be tangentially related to your work. And then saying that, oh, because I've defined my field in such a narrow way, therefore I must have been able to show that I've risen to the top of my field. But if you don't make that argument properly, what is probably going to end up happening is you're going to be producing a very unnatural narrative, a very unnatural profile, sort of like shoehorning things into like something that you know that doesn't fit you, but you think that it is what needs to be done. It's the archetype you need to follow. It's the niche you need to carve out. And then what you end up doing is doing a bunch of random, unnatural activities to force yourself into a niche. And I think that is what leads to very unnatural profiles that most likely will get denied on final merits. A lot of people they keep relying on this niche sort of mentality. Like, I need to make things super narrow, and as a result, I'll be able to show, because of this really small subset, I'll be able to show that I've risen to the top of my field. And for some people it might work because they actually have a really strong niche. They've always worked in this niche, and this usually applies to, say, very deep technical experts. But outside of that, if you work, say, in multiple companies, or you work, say, at a FANG, and then you're, I don't know, like a director of product or something like that, you can still niche down. It's just when you niche down, just make sure it actually makes sense for your profile, and you're not just trying to force activities and include things that you think will automatically make you outstanding to an officer. It's really about the strength of your narrative and whether your argument actually makes sense. That's going to be a big part. Can someone who's never worked in your field understand your argument? That is another thing when it comes to your profile. That is what you need to be showing. It's not as much about showing that you've risen to the top of your field, because a lot of you have actually risen to the top of your field. It's more about explaining how it is that someone who is not in your field would be able to understand that you've risen to the top of your field. So yeah, that is what I wanted to say about this topic. Anyone have questions, feel free to add them. Feel free to leave them in the comments and I will answer them. Anyone have questions? So yeah, for those of you who are joining, just wanted to recap that it is about explaining well how it is you have risen to the top of your field to someone who's never worked in your field, which is going to be the officer. How well you do that explaining is going to determine the strength of your profile. If you do not explain that well, there is nothing to really evaluate. Say you're like a very accomplished director of product or director of engineering, but you just keep saying you are a top director of engineering without any sort of context, any sort of claims, subclaims. How would someone who has never worked in your field be able to understand that you've risen to the top of your field? Because they've never worked in your field, so how would they know? They don't carry the same assumptions you do. So if they don't carry those assumptions, they're not going to understand your argument if you don't present it well. That's really what it is. Is there a requirement for the niche? Can it be generic like software engineering? So my point was, you don't really need a niche if you don't have a niche. It's more about presenting a strong and compelling narrative that makes sense. If you do not have a compelling narrative, if you aren't able to illustrate the comparative significance of your work, if you're not able to explain the assumptions that you carry into assessing your own argument, and because someone in your field, a bunch of really top professionals in your field could say, you have risen to the top of your field. We do agree with your assessment. But you show that to someone who has never worked in your field, they may not understand your argument at all, and as a result, not be able to understand how you've risen to the top of your field. And if you can't prove it, then it's not going to be accepted, which means you're going to get denied. You're going to get denied. So I avoid that is by breaking things down, simplifying things, providing a lot of context, providing different angles to your arguments, different angles to your profile. Those reviewing papers qualify as sufficient evidence to meet the judging criteria for EB-1A. Yes, but problem with just reviewing papers as an industry professional is that usually it is evidence of industry, evidence of research recognition, and not really industry recognition. So if you're not showing industry recognition as an industry professional, you're not really helping with final merits and in strengthening your argument that you've risen to the top of your field. So yes, it can count towards judging. It's just, you should have more than just peer review if you want it to count towards final merit, as in judging evidence. Any other questions? But yeah, going to another point, if you can only show research recognition with no industry recognition, external recognition especially, you are probably going to get questioned on final merits because you haven't really shown how you have risen to the top of your field. So let's say you are a top industry professional and you claim you have risen to the top of your field. So then you go author a bunch of papers in academic journals and you review a bunch of papers for academic journals. You can only present external recognition for researchers. That's how you're going to get questioned. You claim you're a top industry professional, but it seems like all these other top industry professionals in your industry, they all have, say you're a software engineer, hackathon judging or demo day judging, or they've spoken at these conferences, and you've shown absolutely no external recognition from people outside of your company. How can you then claim that you've risen to the top of your field? That is how you're going to get questioned. And if that is how you get questioned, what is going to be your answer to those questions? That, oh no, I'm recognized by researchers. If you don't work with researchers, if you're not a research professional, then it's just not going to make sense. And if your argument doesn't make sense, and you're questioned through an RFE, how do you expect to respond to that RFE? A lot of you also do a lot of questionable things, that questionable in the sense that you do things that don't make sense for your profile. So there's just like, for example, over focus on papers and peer reviewing for industry professionals. How are you being recognized as an industry professional by contributing to an academic journal that's just for researchers? That's a question I ask all the time as well. Hadwait asks, what are some examples of software engineering rising to the field would look like for industry professionals? Sure. So for example, say director of engineering has produced significant outcomes for several top US companies, driven millions, probably even hundreds of millions in revenue for a bunch of top companies. And they have been recognized through judging and authorship. They published like 1 to 2 trade publication articles that talk about their expertise and their work that they have done through the leading a critical role. They have also done a lot of judging, like hackathons and demo days, and even perhaps reviewing for conferences, reviewing speaker proposals. And they were included in those opportunities because of their industry expertise. And then speaking, they've spoken at a couple of conferences, 1 or 2, and they were invited for their industry expertise. That would be a strong profile, even though that's just 3 to 4 criteria. That would be considered a strong profile for a software engineer. Also, it's not about rising to the top of your field. It is having risen to the top of your field. You have to show that you have risen to the top of your field. That is another core aspect of the narrative that is not really captured well. I think people don't understand the difference between rising to the top of their field and have already risen. Rising to the top of your field is not the EB-1A standard. You can't show that you're about to be in the top 1 to 3%. You have to show that you are already in the top 1 to 3%. Because it's having risen to the top of your field. And then how you build your argument around that is what determines the strength of your profile. Any other questions? So we can talk a bit about final merits as well. Final merits simply means the strength of your argument and the argument of how you have risen to the top of your field. That argument is usually based on how well you explain how you've risen to the top of your field. If you're unable to explain that, it doesn't matter if you've actually risen to the top of your field, you will probably get denied. Because your job is to show to someone who's never worked in your field how you've risen to the top of your field. If you're unable to show that, then no one's going to understand your argument. So being able to explain how it is that you've risen to the top of your field is, I think it's a neglected part of profile building. People just want to cram as much evidence in as possible, but they don't really understand how they are constructing a narrative for how they've risen to the top of their field. So they end up with a bunch of random evidence, a lot of which sticks out, and then they get questioned on RFEs, and then sometimes they get denied, sometimes they get approved, but it's still. And I'm only saying this because I've spoken to people who've only claimed 3 criteria and got approved. For example, I spoke to someone who speaks some pretty regularly a couple months ago, and he got approved while on OPT. He got approved for EB-1A while on OPT, and what happened with him was he showed continual progression in his 6 years of experience, from his master's studies all the way up to then creating some sort of ML model that changed government regulations. Now, he only claimed 4 criteria, but he didn't really claim the 4th one because he knew he wouldn't get granted, but he just kind of like still claimed it. So he used his master's thesis for authorship, which is not what you want to be doing for authorship, but he just kind of claimed 3 criteria. He got RFE'd, but he still got approved. And how he did it was he explained really well how it was that he had risen to the top of his field already through his work. He broke things down, simplified things, made sure the layperson would be able to understand his argument, the significance of his work, the wider significance and relevance of his work, and then he got approved. And that was because he was able to simplify things to such a degree that the officer was able to follow his argument and understand how he had risen to the top of his field already. Creedy asks, if I have given 3 to 4 industry talks to startups and other venues, would that count towards authorship evidence? What would be the best place to include them? I'm applying for O-1A visa. Industry talks, probably not authorship. Depends if they were published anywhere, as in publications, but generally speaking, no. They can still help with fund merits, though, in that if you were able to demonstrate expertise through these talks, you were invited to these talks, why you were invited, explaining these things, and again, everything has to be on a layperson level. If a layperson isn't able to understand the wider significance of these talks, then there's really no point in including them. So you have to be able to capture that as well in your explanations. Does reviewing conference papers satisfy? Yes, it does help with peer reviewing, which is a form of judging. It's just that if you just review papers, you could get granted the judging criterion, but still not be able to strengthen fund merits with your judging. So it really depends on whether you want to strengthen judging through paper reviewing. If not, then review papers and just get judging. Can you please give examples that constitute a person risen to the top of the field in AI? Yes, one example is, well, that example I just explained. This person was able to get approved while on OPT, and he got approved because his AI model was able to change Medicare. So he was able to create such a shift in government policy, and other US companies followed suit in using his model to encourage the government to change Medicare. That's quite significant because of the wider significance and massive impact of his work. Are speaking opportunities must to prove that a person reached the top of their field? No, because this person, like just to give you an example, this person did not have any speaking opportunity and he was still approved. Speaking is a way to strengthen your argument. It is not the only way. What are some good examples of citing publications, the trade publications that can count towards authorship for AI field? How do you cement? They are reputed places outside of visitor count, include in letters of reference. Examples are InfoQ, Lead Dev, Towards Data Science is decent. Visitor count has nothing to do. Visitor count has absolutely nothing to do with whether these publications count. Again, that's another misconception. I have no idea where it came from. I guess it's just a convenient number to measure. But you could have millions of people visiting the website from who don't even have the background that you have. So how are you supposed to show that you've risen to the top of your field if you just have a bunch of random people visiting a website and you're saying, hey, this is like an example of an industry publication? Absolutely not. What you want to be doing is media kits. You want to be looking at media kits and seeing if this publication actually describes the demographics and numbers when it comes to these demographics. So for example, Lead Dev has strong numbers. They show who actually visits the website and reads the publications. they say it's engineering managers mostly, over 50,000 from many different countries, from many different companies. They're able to show these numbers, these specific numbers and context around these numbers. It's not visitor count. Avinash asks, what is the role of reference letters to prove that a person has risen to the top of the field, and how would they explain it? Well, reference letters are they're actually forms of evidence. So if you made a claim that, say, this project is top 1%, if you get an industry expert who has 40 years of experience in the field to say, yes, this actually is a top 1% project because of this, and this impact is verified, that is actually affirming your argument, part of your argument that you've risen to the top of your field. Now, saying you produce a significant outcome is of course a sub-argument for how you've risen to the top of your field, and getting a top industry expert to affirm it is in itself additional evidence to back up the same claim. So that's one way. And the other way is context, providing wider context around your work. So this is like top 1%. How do we know it's top 1%? Well, if we look at all these other projects in the same vein, this Avinash's project is top 1% because it outperforms in this particular metric. And given that I am a CEO with 40 years of experience, yes, I do agree with Avinash's assessment. That in itself is evidence. That's a testimonial to your claim. That's how it would help with your profile. What you don't want in a reference letter is, hey, Avinash is really good at his role or something like that. That has nothing to do with providing context and strengthening your claims. Does EB-2 and NIW help EB-1A? It helps in that you actually get to learn more about profile building in general, but other than that, no. Regarding the EB-1A award criterion, do awards need to be recognized in competitive in nature, or would purchase of participation-based awards also count? How do adjudicators generally view such awards? Awards is one of the most highly questioned criterion ever. I believe it's one of, along with media coverage, gets questioned all the time. I have no idea why people go for it. If you understand how EB-1A cases are strengthened and produced, then you'll realize that awards is probably one of the worst criterion to try to target. There's so few industry awards, and those usually go to very top leaders. And most of the awards that I've been seeing have no industry recognition whatsoever. They're self-contained. People only know them because they themselves talk about these awards. It's just not something you should go for. And no, purchased awards definitely do not count. Speaking at conferences as a panelist, would that count in one of the criteria? And if that happens for multiple conferences, it helps with final merits, could help with leading a critical role if you are talking about, if you're showcasing your expertise as a top expert in your field, but most likely final merits. What if one can't get a letter from the company for the original contribution? Example, Google secret project. Then the thing is, if it's an original contribution, then you have contributed to your field and it's being used by other top companies. So if that's private in any way, then you're going to have a really hard time showing the wider significance of your original contributions because no one knows about the wider significance. So maybe you can have some sort of reference letter that hints at the fact that you worked on this kind of original technology without giving away particular details. Also, the focus is not on the specific project. That's another thing. People love to focus on the technical details of their work, but they don't actually focus on how to explain those technical details. You need to explain those details in order for your argument to be strengthened. If you don't explain those details, all those technical details have nothing to do with EB-1A. So it's just, I think this question is potentially problematic in itself because you should be focusing on impact, not on the nature of your project. I mean, there's an angle to this where you can focus on the nature of the project as a way to demonstrate your technical expertise, but the problem with that, again, is you're focusing on the details and you're not focusing on the significance or impact. I mean, like, I don't really understand how talking about impact would give away the details of the project or proprietary information. Probably not. And you can just make the impact very general and get some sort of expert to affirm, probably an expert as in someone at your company, to affirm that you actually delivered on this impact. Probably not going to get an independent reference for a confidential project, but you probably could get one from a company leader who talks about the impact you have created, or at least provides the context for someone who is not in your field to understand the wider significance and comparatively significant nature of your work. Notice that you can do that without revealing any sort of details whatsoever. Anyone else have questions? Anyone have questions? Also, a lot of you are focusing on reference letters too early on in the process. Your focus should be on profile building, not on reference letters, not on AO, decisions, not on any of that. Many professional associations like IEEE or PMI require a fee to join. Would such memberships qualify, or does USCIS expect memberships that are based on outstanding achievements and selective admission? Again, the membership criterion is completely misunderstood. Requiring a fee to join is completely fine. IEEE fellowship, which definitely counts towards the membership criterion, also has a fee. It's not about whether the membership requires a fee or not. It's whether the membership requires outstanding achievements of its members as evaluated by nationally recognized or internationally recognized experts. Now, how you define outstanding achievements is the difficult part of membership, because it really means anything you want it to mean. As in, the officer could have one view, you could have another, and then if they clash, then you don't get granted membership. IEEE membership general definitely doesn't count, because it's not a requirement to have outstanding achievements. You can just join by paying the fee. That definitely doesn't count. Fellowship counts because you definitely do need outstanding achievements, and it is possible to build an argument around that. So does something like a board position at a top company, something like that. But membership is just difficult to meet in general. That being said, membership can still help with on merits if you have the right memberships. Also, it's not just about joining organizations. It can be committee positions. It could be ambassador programs or industry advisory boards. It doesn't have to be joining a professional organization. Can I use pending patents? No. Patent has been completed, implemented, and used across teams, but it has not been awarded yet. Probably not. It should be granted. That being said, you can use whatever you've done as leading or critical role evidence, because seems like the work has been implemented and used across teams. I would be included in press releases of vendor companies. Should be about you or your work. It still could be leading a critical role. I don't understand why people like to go for the media coverage criteria. You're essentially just inviting more questions around your profile by claiming more criteria. The more criteria you claim, the more questions you're going to have to answer, especially if you do a low quality job of claiming the criteria, which is what I see all the time. People are trying to cram as much low quality evidence in as possible to try to meet 8 criteria, and then they get granted all 8, and then they get denied on final merits. I've seen this all the time. Yeah. All right, I'll take a couple more questions. All right, last question. I have 8 years of experience in IT, and I currently play a critical role at a Fortune 100 company. However, I don't yet have have evidence to satisfy the judging criterion for EB-1A. What steps should I take to strengthen my case for both authorship and membership, authorship and judging? For example, can I publish papers or participate in conference paper reviews? Would these activities be sufficient? So no, these activities would probably just help you with the plain language level of the criteria for judging and authorship. So you could get granted judging or authorship, but it probably won't help with final merits unless you're some sort of research professional as well. What you are suggesting is what everyone defaults to for some reason. Everyone loves to default to publishing papers and peer reviewing for conferences, and then they're like, why did I get questioned on final merits? Well, it's because you showed absolutely no external recognition within your field whatsoever, because all the recognition you've gotten has been from researchers and not from industry professionals. So they would be sufficient for getting you judging and authorship as plain language level criteria, but outside of that, you are going to be heavily reliant on your linear and critical role for final merits. So sufficient for the criteria, yes. Sufficient for final merits, absolutely not. Because it goes back to this idea of final merits is about whether you've risen to the top of your field. If you have risen to the top of your field in industry, the officer is going to see other examples and see that people in your field generally have industry recognition, not research recognition. So they're going to use that against you, and then you're going to get denied on final merits, most likely. That is unless you can show a really strong linear and critical role, in which case it might not matter. You can just use a linear and critical role to drive final merits. But let's say you don't really have that strong of a linear and critical role. You're not like the CEO of a company. You're not like some director of product like a FANG or something like that. Then you probably will get questioned on final merits. And that is something you definitely want to avoid. So I would suggest looking at industry-related activities as well, in addition to whatever peer reviewing and publishing papers, if you really, really want to do those things. All right, any other questions? All right. Thanks everyone for joining today's live stream. Hi everyone. Let's get started with answering questions about EB-1A profile building, and we can also cover NIW and O-1 if anyone has any questions as well. But to start, let's talk about some insights from recent conversations with immigration lawyers as well as EB-1A recipients. So recently I had a conversation with an EB-1A recipient who I worked with at one point for profile building. And something that came up was we talked a lot about what he ended up developing as an understanding for EB-1A and what he got to know as he was about to file and what was different about what he knew at that point in time versus when he started. And one difference in understanding that he brought up was that he saw that a lot of the opportunities that he was initially doing for EB-1A profile building, they weren't the ones that eventually helped him present a strong case narrative and then eventually get approved. It took a lot of different activities and different opportunities to eventually get to a point where he was getting access to some of the more prestigious, some of the more high-profile opportunities that eventually helped with his case narrative. And he broke down the kinds of profile building opportunities you can go for into a couple of tiers. So the first tier being the opportunities that everyone sees and that most people in a field will probably get access to. if they just applied, especially if you have shown a lot of expertise over the course of many years. You usually get access to those kinds of opportunities. And then there's tier 2 opportunities where these are opportunities that are more difficult to land, but they're still generally publicly available and that you can apply for them. And while a smaller percentage of people get these opportunities, people still end up getting them, assuming you have shown some level of expertise or a high level of expertise over the course of many years. And then there are tier 3 opportunities. And these are the kinds of opportunities that tend to make for a strong profile because you firstly don't really see these opportunities. They're not really publicly available. They are usually visible only through referrals, and there's usually a high bar for getting selected. So we're talking about industry advisory board opportunities with top universities, or perhaps some sort of committee position with a very specific industry initiative within your field of expertise. So we're talking the kinds of opportunities where they aren't very common, and you can prove that you had to undergo a very strict selection process to get the opportunity. So going back to the conversation I was having with the EB-1A recipient, he told me that he eventually got to a point where he was able to build a strong case narrative because he was able to get a lot of these tier 3 opportunities, but it wasn't like he just started off with getting tier 3 opportunities. It took a lot of getting tier 1 and tier 2 opportunities before he eventually got tier 3 opportunities. And I think that's a great way to just highlight something that I constantly talk about with profile building. And it is that you don't profile build by doing a bunch of surface level checklist activities that are very generic, that if you asked an industry professional in your field to review them, they would firstly ask what they are, and then they would question whether they actually show that you've risen to the top of your field. That's really what the checklist approach is. I see it all the time where people are just constantly doing activity after activity, but not really thinking about how that particular activity helps show that they've risen to the top of their field. So if you want to get to a point where you're not adopting this checklist exercise, but instead actually building a profile that has strong final merits, you will want to adopt the approach that this EB-1A recipient took, which was start off with tier 1 and tier 2 opportunities that are somewhat publicly available and are somewhat attainable if you have a sufficient level of industry expertise shown over the course of many years. But then it's the tier 3 opportunities that you eventually get just after building up enough goodwill and building up enough proof that you are an expert. And then once you get noticed for these more high profile opportunities, that's when you build a much stronger case narrative. So that is one insight that I think is quite helpful in highlighting what profile building is actually about. It is not about it's just not about doing a bunch of activities, checking off a bunch of criteria. It is more so you have to think about what your argument is for how you've risen to the top of your field, and then try to secure as prestigious of opportunities as possible. That's how you land more profile. That's how you build a stronger profile. So this was one insight that I came across from a recent conversation with an EB-1A recipient. Anyone have questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. Anyone have any questions? Anyone have questions? So we can talk also about a very common misconception when it comes to sustain a claim. I get a sense that people think that sustain a claim is about showing an extended period of profile building, that doing that is enough to show sustain a claim. So sometimes you see people in a situation where they show 8, 10, 12 months of profile building, and then they say they have a strong sustain a claim argument. But when you really look into the activities that they have done, they tend to be very generic, and then that's not sustain a claim. That's just sustained profile building, if you can even call it that. Sustain a claim is about showing that you are continually recognized for your expertise. And one way to show that is to show continual involvement in industry activities that on their own show that you've risen to the top of your field. Of course, not every single activity you do has to be of that nature, but showing that a good number of those activities does fall within that bucket is going to be useful in showing that you have risen to the top of your field and that you're getting recognized for your expertise externally. So when you're thinking about sustain a claim, think about whether you're actually doing activities that prove that you have risen to the top of your field on the basis of your expertise. If that is not the case, then you're just doing generic activities. You're not really strengthening your sustain a claim arguments, because it's sustained a claim. It's not just sustained activity. So it's a very common misconception. And a lot of people think that they're going to be able to overcome sustain a claim objections simply by doing a lot of profile building over the course of more than a year. But it's not as simple as that. You also have to show strong levels of a claim. Anyone have questions? Anyone have questions? Anyone have questions? Hello, we have published patent, or can we claim same patent in 2 category? Evidence of your original scientific contributions and evidence of your authorship of scholarly articles. Generally speaking, no. I think this question came up in a virtual event that I recently hosted. A patent is usually used to show strong original contributions, but you have to show that the patent is actually in use and being commercialized and helping with producing significant commercial outcomes for top companies in your field and are advancing your field as a whole, whereas authorship tends to focus on scholarly articles for a learned audience, and those tend to be papers or industry publication articles, but not really patents. Anyone have questions? Anyone else? Would you suggest working on 6 moderately strong requirements for EB-1A or 3 to 4 strong requirements for EB-1A? Highly depends on the current configuration of your evidence. If you want to show that, so highly depends on what you currently have on hand and also the kinds of opportunities that you've gotten access to before. So for certain criteria like media coverage or awards, unless you already have some sort of strong basis for media or awards, and some people do have a strong bases for both of these criteria because they've done past media appearances already, they've constantly appeared in the media, they have always gotten access to, maybe like they're part of committees that help judge awards and they've gotten awards as a result as well, then perhaps those criteria would make sense. But generally speaking, I tend to suggest that you go for authorship and judging first, in addition to perhaps leading a critical role and high salary and urgent contributions if you have the evidence for that. But generally speaking, you probably want to go for 3 to 4 strong requirements to start, and then focus on activities that show levels of expertise, acclaim, and impact in your field that as a whole show that you've risen to the top of your field. That is the real focus of EB-1A. It's not about the requirement. It's not about the criteria. So once you get to a point where you have 3 to 4 criteria met based on the evidence that you have been able to gather, then you will probably want to focus on just building strong final merits and not targeting more criteria that you don't really have any bases for. Like if you've never done a media appearance, probably avoid the media coverage criterion. If you've never gotten in some sort of industry award externally, you probably want to avoid awards. There's really no point in finding generic opportunities to try to check these criteria off because you're probably not going to be able to do that. And what's probably going to happen is you're going to get questioned on those criteria, and then you're just going to open up a bunch of questioning for your profile. Whereas you may have just avoided that entirely just by targeting 3 to 4 strong criteria and then focusing all your efforts on final merits. Anyone else have questions? Anyone have questions? What would constitute strong evidence for criterion A? Critical role in the organization, recommendation letters from different directors or senior leaders within the organization would help. Yes, reference letters generally tend to help and are probably going to be needed for leading a critical role. But outside of that, you will also want to show what's called objective evidence. And this tends to be more along the lines of, say, coverage of your work by company blogs or some sort of recognition within your company, within, say, a report within your company, talking about the contributions that you made to the company or the contributions your team made to the company. Reference letters are more about what one person says about your work, whereas objective evidence is about documented impact. So, for example, you produced a certain outcome and it's been covered within your company's internal blogs that cite the significance of these outcomes. On that basis, you would have a much stronger critical role claim because you wouldn't just be relying on what one particular person has said about your work, you would be relying on some sort of widespread documentation of what you've actually done. So it's not just about reference letters, it's about objective evidence as well. And that could come in the form of coverage of your work by your company or by external media sources, or it could be some sort of mention within company emails or company reports. Any sort of cited praise for your work on a more widespread level is going to help more than just reference letters. So that's just something to keep in mind for critical role. Anyone else have questions? Hi. Hi. Anyone have questions? Realistically, how long does it take to build a profile for O-1 from outside the US starting from scratch? And when in the process would be a good time to get in touch with attorneys? Thank you, you're welcome. So generally speaking, so for O-1, you're trying to show that you're risen to the top of your field, top 25% of your field, generally speaking. So it really depends on your starting point. If you've already done quite a few significant projects within your field, if you have a significant role within your company, within your field, and it's a top company that is distinguished, then it's possible to do it in a year or year and a half. It really depends on where you're starting from. So I've seen people build strong O-1 profiles in 8 months and get approved. I've also seen people take a lot longer than that, but it was because they were at different starting points and they just needed different things as well based on the criteria that they were targeting. Some people wanted to target more criteria, so they spent more time on their profile. Some people targeted fewer criteria or were at a point where they already had evidence for quite a few criteria and they already had a strong sustain and claim argument as well and were able to show strong proof that they had already risen to the top of the field. It highly depends on where you're starting from. And as for when to get in touch with attorneys, I think it's possible. I think you should get in touch for initial consultations near the start of the process and then periodically check in to see if you are making progress and are on the right track. So yeah. Anyone else have questions? What evidence will work for judging others, for the judging others' work and critical to the company? Please share your thoughts. Well, there are a lot of things you can do for judging. So it could be judging hackathons, demo days, reviewing submissions for conferences, reviewing submissions for industry publications, reviewing examination materials for professional organizations, especially if you are a part of a professional body and you help with designing the curriculum for a particular professional examination. I've seen this before. As for critical role, evidence is going to include, as I said, reference letters and also objective evidence where you can show documented impact of your work beyond just what one person said. So that could be company reports mentioning your work. It could be internal blogs mentioning your work. It could be external media covering your work. Anything where you can show that what you did was covered externally in some way or mentioned on a more field-wide or company-wide basis, and it's not just something you said happened and you're the only person and one other person maybe. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, this is going to, based on conversations with lawyers, these do still seem to be getting approved, but it will highly depend on your background. As for the EB-2 NIW is about showing that you intend to contribute to an area of national interest outside of your work with your company. And to do that, you will need to articulate benefits that you would bring to the U.S. through this venture that you are working on. And having a PhD or not having a PhD is not really going to make that much of a difference unless it's directly related to the benefits that you intend to bring to the U.S. in exchange for what would really just be a waiver of the perm. It's probably not close to zero. It really depends on the kinds of lawyers you speak to. Some of the lawyers I've been speaking with are still getting EB-2 NIW approvals, so it highly depends on who you speak to. Anyone else have questions? There you go. All right, no one else has questions. Thanks, everyone, for joining today's live stream. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing? Let's get started. Feel free to start asking questions. But yeah, I'm just going to start off with covering a common question that I get. And I get this question pretty much on all of my profile building calls, and it is, which criteria should I target as an industry professional? And for most of you, the criteria to target are going to be outside of leading a critical role and high salary and possibly original contributions is judging and authorship and potentially membership. Everything else outside of that, like media coverage and awards, they're not going to be the kinds of criteria that you want to target right off the bat. And the reason for why media coverage is not, or awards, those kinds of criteria are not criteria you want to target, is because they're just difficult to meet. They're difficult to meet because they're not really interpreted on a plain language level. And what that means is, say with judging tends to be interpreted on a plain language level, which means that if you've done any form of judging, you could potentially get the criterion, or there's a high likelihood you could get granted the criterion, assuming that the judging that you've done is legitimate and not low quality. That doesn't really apply to awards and media coverage, in that you could have some awards, you could have received some awards, you could have received media coverage, and still not be able to claim the criterion because an officer introduced a higher standard, one based on their subjective understanding of the criterion instead of on what is actually written in the policy manual. So unlike judging, for example, if you've done a bit of judging and it falls under the pretty much like the layperson's understanding of the policy manual, then it counts towards judging. Whereas with awards, that is not something that usually happens, or with media coverage, it's not something that usually happens. Also, it's quite unlikely for industry professionals to get media coverage and awards. So those are two criteria that you don't really want to target unless you really have to. But for some reason, they still come up all the time. Like, people love to talk about awards. People love to talk about media. That's just something to keep in mind. Outside of that, yeah, the other common question I get is how to start off with finding judge role opportunities. So I answered this question today with a profile building call. There are quite a few ways to find judge role opportunities, and it usually comes down to a mixture of applying for these opportunities as they come up, as you see them, and reaching out to people who are already involved in the judging activities that you want to participate in. So applying is pretty obvious. Just go find some calls for reviewers. Sometimes conferences will have that, although not very common. I haven't seen too many of them have that. Or just apply for a hackathon that has a judge form. That is a form that you can fill out to get a judging opportunity. But yeah, that's one side of getting these opportunities. There's also outreach. Outreach is probably the more effective way to land judging opportunities. And it's also the way you want to land judging opportunities that are not visible, that don't have open calls, but could still involve you. So for example, a lot of upcoming conferences have conference committees. While they are usually not advertising some sort of open application for conference committee positions, based on some of the people I've spoken to, they have been able to land conference committee positions just by reaching out and showing how their expertise is relevant to the conference, particularly the industry track. So that is something else you can do to land judging opportunities, because on the conference committee, you could potentially get access to peer review opportunities by helping review submissions for the conference. You can also reach out to VCs, to people who are organizing hackathons, to incubators. A lot of them will have access to the kinds of judging that you want to be doing, like judging startup pitch competitions, judging hackathons. Those are just the kinds of opportunities that you can just get by reaching out to the right people. So that's just a bit about targeting criteria and also judge role opportunities. Hi, Henry. Greetings. And yeah, feel free to start asking questions. In the meantime, I can share some of the resources that I've put together as part of my paid newsletter. So as part of my newsletter, which is $12 per month, you will get access to some of my newsletter resources, which includes a profile building opportunities database. So this database currently contains hundreds of profile building opportunities broken down by field, categorized by criteria. And these are just to give you a sense of how to start with profile building, the kinds of opportunities you want to get involved with as a way to start meeting top professionals in your field and to start landing judge role opportunities, judging opportunities, membership opportunities, authorship opportunities. So if you look down here, there are quite a few fields that I've covered. I think the most opportunities I have so far are for software engineers, for people in AI. So this is just to give you a sense of how you can get started with profile building and the kinds of opportunities you can actually go for. I also review AO decisions from time to time. These go into USCIS's reasoning behind and initially denying an EB-1A or NIW or O-1. And from these decisions, I draw out profile building insights, which give you an understanding of how USCIS thinks about EB-1A, about EB-2 NIW, and about O-1. I also have some video resources as part of my newsletter resources, and these are just recorded conversations with EB-1A recipients where I ask questions that a lot of you ask me all the time, like how to claim leading a critical role, how to claim original contributions, how to put together strong reference letters. So I asked some of these in my video resources. And something I also run as part of my newsletter is a private group and a group chat where a lot of people have been sharing collaboration requests. I've heard many times now of people finding opportunities just from other people within the group chat, because there are a lot of these industry leaders as well as leaders of professional organizations in the group chat, and they're always sharing opportunities that are particular to their organization. I've heard people get published in IEEE conferences by working with people who are in the group chat. And there are all kinds of opportunities being shared and all kinds of, I think like recently I saw a call for book chapter contributions for a notable publisher. These are just the kinds of opportunities that are being shared in the private group right now and the group chat. So that's something else that you will get access to as part of my newsletter. And something else I'm looking to host more of are insight sessions There'll be one this Wednesday with an EB-1A and O-1 recipient within the group. So she was able to get EB-1A and O-1, and she was a part of the private group. So she'll be sharing insights. I will also be organizing another insight session with a product manager who has been able to build quite a strong EB-1A profile. And I will also be organizing an insight session with an IET fellow and fellowship advisor who is also currently a part of the private group. So that's just to give you a sense of some of the insight sessions that are coming up. And you can get access to these resources as part of my paid newsletter, which is $12 per month. Would love to know about memberships. So membership is a difficult criterion to target, but it can be a criterion you can go for, especially if you think that you have the possibility of joining some of these member organizations. It's not really about joining general member organizations and becoming a general member. It's more about joining memberships and showing that a requirement of membership is outstanding achievements in your field. So you need to go higher than just general member. So that could be joining a committee of a conference, of a top conference in your field, and showing that you had to go through a rigorous selection process in order to get into that conference committee. It could be joining an editorial board of a top publication in your field and showing that this required some sort of rigorous evaluation process and that other members of the editorial board have outstanding achievements. You will have to argue the definition of outstanding achievements. You will have to show the context for an officer to accept your claim that you were able to show outstanding achievements as a member, and that other members who hold this tier of membership have outstanding achievements. So that's just a bit about the membership criterion, and it is difficult to meet, but you can still try to meet it with memberships that requires members to have outstanding achievements. And again, you have to define what that means for the officer. So that's just a bit about memberships. Anyone else have questions? Feel free to start asking questions in the chat. But yeah, since there are no other questions, I can't stress this enough. A lot of profile building is just about outreach. It's about reaching the right people who have access to the opportunities that you want to get access to. And that may sometimes require that you join a member organization that requires like some sort of membership fee. That may require you to go to local chapter events, to talk to people. Vanya asks, can reviewing open source pull requests come under judging if you're a maintainer or approver? It would have to be for open source contributions outside of your company, possibly to a well-known open source project. This is more of the unconventional kind of judging that you might want. It's more unconventional in that it could work. It just has to be for an open source project outside of your company. And you have to explain how doing this is an example of judging the work of others. You're going to have to explain that. And whether USCIS buys that argument or not is going to come down to how well you explain it. And can maintainer qualify as a membership? Depends. If you are the leader of an open source project that is being used by thousands of US companies, then perhaps that could count towards the membership criterion, but again, you have to show outstanding achievements. Can the subscription be on a month by month basis? Is there any commitment? No, there's no commitment. There are two ways you can become a member of my paid newsletter. You can either join on a monthly basis or you can join on an annual basis. So there are two options, and you can cancel anytime. Any other questions? But yeah, going back to what I was saying, a lot of EB-1A profile building is just outreach. So if you want authorship opportunities, reach out to a lot of people who are working on papers and publications and book chapters in your field. Try to target 20 to 30 of these people every single day, if possible. Get to a point where you're reaching out to hundreds of people every month, and you will start to encounter people who are doing the kinds of activities that you want to be doing. And the reason why I say this is because I am also doing this exact same thing, except I'm doing it for my newsletter. I am contacting people who have access to these kinds of opportunities and then redirecting these people to the newsletter group. And in the course of maintaining this group, I've been coming across all kinds of people who have been working on papers, who have been contributing to books, who have been working on technical publications. So I see these people all the time, and they're exactly the kinds of people you want to be talking to. So I see these people all the time. I talk to at least 2 of them a day. So because of that, that is my understanding of profile building. There are all these people out there doing the kinds of activities that you want to be doing as a profile builder. And all it takes is for you to reach out to them and start a conversation. Do that hundreds of times, and you will probably end up with 2 to 3 profile building opportunities in a span of 6 months. And that's like judging opportunities, that's authorship opportunities. It's just going to come down to a lot of outreach, a lot of messages, a lot of presenting your expertise and showing that it is relevant to the person you're reaching out to. You can't just reach out and say, hey, I saw that you're working on a paper, let me be a co-author. You can't just do that. It's more about showing that first you have to ask if they need a co-author. You have to understand their needs as well. Maybe they're not in need of a co-author, in which case perhaps there are other ways you can still help. And then maybe months down the line, they will start to think about you because you helped them once, and then they may have come across someone who is in need of a co-author. And then that's how you could get a co-author opportunity. And that could lead to some sort of IEEE paper. That could lead to some sort of book with O'Reilly or Taylor and Francis. Those are the really common publishers that I've been coming across with a lot of these profile building, a lot of profile builders who are contributing book chapters. But that's just to give you an example of how important outreach actually is. It's what's going to determine a lot of what's going to happen with your profile building in the next 6 months to a year. How much outreach you do. And I say this because I've also seen several examples, more than several examples, of profile builders who have been able to build extremely strong profiles just through outreach alone. All they did was they just went to every single local chapter event for all the organizations they were able to join. ACM, IEEE, they went to all the meetups, they went to all the local chapter events, and they simply just went to talk to people. And from those conversations, they were able to start landing opportunities that then got them speaking opportunities, that then got them authorship opportunities, that then got them judging opportunities. It's just about starting as many conversations as possible with people who can use your expertise to help with what they need help with so that they can then involve you in the opportunities that they are involved with. How many judging opportunities are good to have? I would say 2 to 3 are good. Anything above 10 is probably too much. 2 to 3 is good, I would say. And 2 to 3 high quality judging opportunities. Not just like low quality opportunities that, and this is something I was going to talk about as well. It's that when judging the quality of an opportunity, you want to think about how it can advance your argument that you're risen to the top of your field. That's the argument you're trying to advance with EB-1A. With anything you present, it's about showing how you've risen to the top of your field. If you want to show a compelling argument for how you've risen to the top of your field, make sure the evidence you present makes sense for that argument. Because the last thing you would want is to have everything look really strong and then include some sort of shady or sketchy opportunity that doesn't really show that you're risen to the top of your field. It might even suggest that you just kind of got the opportunity automatically because it was more like a pay-to-play sort of thing and not really a way for you to actually showcase your expertise. I'm not saying all paid opportunities are pay-to-play, but there are definitely certain opportunities that look pay-to-play and that they will accept literally anyone and they will have no will have no quality standards whatsoever. Now, like having to pay for something is not the defining factor for whether something is sketchy or not. There are lots of organizations that are legitimate that require payment, but something that you want to be careful of is if the opportunity just comes up like all the time. It's like the same opportunity, and like hundreds of people have that same exact opportunity. That is a sign that perhaps it's low quality, because it seems like they accept literally everyone, and they accept a very broad category of people. But going back to the point, 2 to 3 is good. Anything above 3 is not going to be that relevant unless, I would say 2 to 3. But going back to evaluating the quality, you want to be mindful of the quality as well. For quality, always think about recognition, influence, and impact. These are the 3 things to possibly think about for any kind of opportunity. Recognition as in, are you getting recognized by other top professionals in your field through this opportunity? And can you show evidence that you have gotten recognition? Influence as in, are you shaping the industry in some way, getting top professionals in your field to act a certain way? It could be reshaping technical standards, reshaping thought around a particular aspect of your field. And then impact is, it could be impact in terms of, have you moved the industry in some way, advanced it in some way, gotten people to think differently about the industry in some way? These are just some of the kinds of ways to think about the quality of an opportunity and whether it actually advances your argument that you've risen to the top of your field, which is what you want to be doing with EB-1A. It's about advancing your argument that you have risen to the top of your field. That is what EB-1A is about. It's not about checking off a bunch of random criterion, it's something that just comes up all the time. Like a lot of people seem to think that all they need to do is do a whole bunch of activities, do as many as possible, show as many different examples as possible without regard for quality, thinking that if something sticks, then they have a strong argument. But what you could end up doing is just showing a bunch of low quality evidence alongside your high quality evidence, and overall dilute your argument that you're risen to the top of your field. Because think about it. If you are a top professional in your field and you present low quality evidence to advance your argument that you're risen to the top of your field, think about how an officer would think about that. Think about how anyone in your field would think about that. Would they still think you're a top professional? They might question that. They might question that assessment because you included something that was clearly low quality. How about publications? How many are good to have? 2 to 3 again. That's what I'm just going to keep saying for any of the criterion. Anything above 3 is good, but anything above 10 is too much, is what I would say. But this is just for industry professionals. For research profiles, it's different. Would being a co-author of an article with 7 or more other authors make a strong case for you? I have actually not seen that, but at that point, perhaps you could get questioned simply on the basis that you probably played a minimal role in the publication. I mean, I have not seen that, so don't quote me on that. I have not seen someone submit that kind of evidence. But if I was an officer and if I was seeing like 3 articles from you and you're like the 7th co-author for all of them, then I could question whether you actually contributed that much to the article. Of course, that's not the correct standard to apply on the plain language level of things, but that's the line of questioning you are inviting, because it's abnormal to have an article with 7 or more co-authors. Or at least that's just what I've seen. It looks odd. Anyone else have questions? Any other questions? Oh yeah, another point is meeting more criteria does not necessarily mean a stronger profile. In fact, it could just lead to more questions about your profile. So a lot of people think, okay, I have like 5 criteria. I need awards and media coverage now. So they go for low quality awards and low quality media, thinking that by including more evidence, they are automatically strengthening their profile. That is not the case. The more low quality evidence you include, this is just generally speaking, the more likely you are to get questioned on that low quality evidence and just shift your attention away from the high quality evidence. Shift the attention of the officer away from the high quality evidence. And I don't think that's what you want to be doing. A lot of you have this mindset of, I'm going to do as many activities as possible to meet as many criteria as possible. But that's not what a strong profile is about. A strong profile is about presenting a strong argument for how you've risen to the top of your field. Yes, if you can get high quality awards and high quality media coverage, and I've seen both. I've seen industry professionals get high quality media coverage. I think someone I spoke to got more than 50 media coverage examples, but that was because he was already doing a lot of media appearances even before EB-1A. So this was something that he just always did. But that's just to give you a sense of, what is actually needed. It's not more criteria. It's just more high quality evidence. How to frame final merits and sustain a claim for industry experts. Final merits usually comes down to leading a critical role. For industry experts, possibly original contributions. It's about showing that your achievements indicate that you've risen to the top of your field. Sustain a claim does sometimes get questioned, and it gets questioned, and I've seen this happen several times. People have told me that they got questioned because they only did 2 to 3 months of profile building. That is where you could get questioned on sustain a claim. Again, it's not the right standard to apply, but it is, because the term sustain a claim is so subjective. You could get questioned on the basis of having profile built for just 2 to 3 months. But I think people have been saying that 6 months to a year profile building is what you want to be going for, at least. So that could be a way to avoid the sustain a claim line of questioning that comes up. But for final merits is about showing how you've risen to the top of your field. And it's about those 1 or 2 things that show that you're risen to the top of your field. Sometimes that's just completely on the basis of your leading a critical role. And how to frame that is usually through comparative and contextual evidence, showing something that is just considered impressive in your field. It could also be showing that you have risen above others in your field. For example, saying, I did this one thing, and thousands of other professionals in my field have not even been able to do anything close to this one thing. So as a result, I am a top professional in my field. That's the kind of evidence you might also want to introduce as part of leading a critical role that could help with final merits, because you are, again, showing how you've risen to the top. And to the top probably means that you are above many, many others. Or at least that's the kind of argument you want to present. Can one evidence be used to satisfy 2 criteria, like say original contributions and critical role? Yes, there could be overlaps between the 2, but I think the only situation where there would be overlap is if something that you've done shows that you've contributed to your field outside of your company, because that's what original contributions is going to be about. You can't just show that you've contributed to your company. You have to show that your contributions spanned beyond your company and into your field and affected other companies. That could be part of critical role, because maybe your company works with a lot of other top US companies, and as a result, you were able to develop some sort of technology that is now being used by lots of your company's clients. So that could be critical role, because maybe you were able to generate significant revenue from that project, and then was able to affect other US companies as well, that then adopted the technology that you developed within your company, and then you were able to affect other companies in your field. And that could be an example of commercial usage. That could be significant attention, depending on what kinds of US companies you affected. So yeah, you could have, I wouldn't say like one piece of evidence, but maybe like one experience or one role help you argue 2 criteria. Anyone else have questions? All right, I'll answer a few more questions. Anyone else have questions? Or I can just start asking myself questions. So one question that comes up a lot is, how do I land committee positions? Committee positions come from talking to committee members of the committees you want to join. I know it sounds like kind of simplistic, obvious, but that is the reality of landing these kinds of member positions. It's just a lot of outreach. Like, if you reach out to these committee members, show how you can contribute to the committee, or just be so relevant in expertise that you're automatically considered for the committee, then that is how you can land a spot on the committee, because you've shown your relevance, you've shown how you can help. And that goes for any of these other opportunities. Like, you want to get onto a journal editorial board, understand the requirements, understand what they need, understand the gaps that they are facing within the editorial board. Maybe they're getting a kind of submission that no one has expertise in, and only you have expertise in that submission, in reviewing that kind of submission. So say that you have that expertise and plug that gap. And by plugging that gap, you are showing that you can be useful to them. And by being useful to them, you will be invited for opportunities to do things for them. You're essentially trying to find ways to do things for them. You want to do things for them, you show you're an expert in what they need, in areas that they need the most help. That's essentially what you need to be doing. That's a lot of landing profile building opportunities. Anyone else have questions? Can you give an example of committees? Well, a lot of IEEE conferences that are coming up have conference committees. So those could count towards the membership criterion, especially if you can argue how your being on the committee indicates that you have outstanding achievements in your field and that other members of the committee have outstanding achievements in the field. Another example could be an advisory board, say for software engineering. It could be lead dev, it could be dev network. These organizations have advisory boards that help with judging hackathons, help with judging awards, help with judging, say, Dev Network's Developer Week conference awards, their Devies. So these are just some examples of committees that you could join. Anyone else have questions? All right, if there are no other questions, thanks everyone for joining today's live stream. Or I can just take another couple of questions. Depends on any other questions. All right, I'll take this one last question. Can you please give more examples of judging roles that might help? So peer reviewing, judging awards, judging contributions to a publication, judging open source contributions for a well-known open source project, judging hackathons, judging startup pitch competitions, judging committee applications for a committee, judging advisory board applications, judging PhD theses. That's been explicitly mentioned in the policy manual. But I think it has to be like PhD level theses. Judging, I guess, outside of the field of tech, like contributions to some sort of like industry project that is like field wide. Judging applications for a conference committee. Yeah, those are just some of the examples that have come to mind. Yeah, you're welcome. Welcome everyone. Right. That's all for today's live stream. Thanks everyone for joining. All right. And what evidence would you need to show? So like photos, emails, email correspondence, possibly letters from some of these people to confirm that you participated in the opportunity and perhaps to give some context as to what the opportunity was about. Yeah, that's just the kinds of evidence you can include. All right, that's it for today's live stream. Thanks, everyone. Okay, the last question. Does judging 2 conference papers for a conference is fine? Or we need to do multiple papers? 2 conference papers would count as 2 examples of judging, so that should be fine. Yeah. But it just depends on how strong of a judge role criterion do you want to present? So if all you want to do is 2 papers and you think that those 2 papers alone, because they're so high quality and that your judging was so high quality that you don't think anyone's going to question any of the judging you've done, then yeah, submit 2 papers. But some people have a different comfort level and they think that, oh, like these 2 papers is not enough. Like I know someone who is still profile building. He has an extremely strong profile. He's a C-suite professional and he has like 7 criteria and he is still profile building. Like some people are just not comfortable with presenting a profile that is not extremely rock solid. But some people are just fine. They're in a rush. They want to profile build as quickly as possible, apply. In which case, 2 conference papers would be quite good because that's 2 examples of peer reviewing, 2 examples of judging. All right. Thanks everyone for joining today's live stream. Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm a bit late. How's everyone doing? Feel free to start asking questions. And I can also cover a couple of things that have been coming up. First thing that's come up and has always been coming up is how many emails and messages should I be sending in total to get profile building opportunities? Now, I question whether this is even the right question to ask. You should really be thinking instead about how many emails and messages you can send every single day to get profile building opportunities. Because if you think about the number of messages you need to send in total, that number might be so big that you just kind of don't send any messages and emails as a result, because you think, oh, like 5,000 messages, that's quite a few messages. So what you should instead be doing is just focusing on the daily target that you can meet, say 30 messages, and just focus on that. And don't set a specific timeline for how long you want to keep this up. Instead, just do like 30 messages daily and just keep doing that. And if 30 messages seems far more reachable than 5,000 messages, then you'll just automatically do 30 messages every day. That is, if you keep keeping this up and doing outreach. Over time, you'll realize that you'll just crank out these messages automatically to people in your field who are involved in the kinds of activities you'll want to be doing. And then eventually opportunities will start coming to a point where you'll just feel inclined to do this outreach because you're seeing that you're getting opportunities. But in order to get to that level of activation, it's like an activation threshold that I think about, that I've seen a lot of profile builders get to. And once they get to, their behavior completely changes. When they get to a point, say, where they're getting 2-3 profile building opportunities every month, they just are more inclined to do outreach. And it's really about getting to that point where you are seeing the kind of feedback you want to be seeing from doing the kind of outreach you should be doing. That is when I've noticed that people's behavior just completely changes. So to get to that point, you should really be focusing on a daily target, something that's more realistic, something that's more reachable, instead of focusing on some total outcome that might be 5,000-10,000 messages, which is it's the same behavior. It's just a different way to see that behavior. Also, feel free to start asking questions. Another thing that comes up all the time is, how do I get noticed by the people I reached out to? Now, getting noticed it's not just about doing the outreach and showing up in front of someone and just waiting for them to... Oh, wait, there's a question. Hannah asks, does reviewing proposals sent for a project count as judging reviewing the work of others if it is within your company? No. However, that kind of evidence can potentially help with leading a critical role depending on the project. But if it's just done within your company, it's probably not going to count towards the judge role criterion. You will want to be focusing on activities that you do in your field outside your company. But going back to what I was saying about a second thing that's come up all the time, it's how to get noticed. If you want to get noticed, then you want to not just wait for someone to kind of guess how you can help them. If you're reaching out, especially if you're reaching out to, say, a conference organizer or someone who is in charge of a technical committee or some sort of advisory board, if you are just waiting for people to recognize how you can help, then you're just going to slow things down significantly. It's going to take a lot longer for you to get noticed. So instead of instead of relying on people guessing how you can help, show how your expertise is aligned with the needs of, say, a conference you are reaching out about, or a committee that you want to join, or an advisory board you want to join. It's not as simple as just reaching out and getting noticed and then showing up and then thinking that you're going to automatically get considered for an opportunity. It's probably not going to be the case, especially for the most sought after opportunities. So instead of just waiting around and waiting for people to see that you can contribute to whatever they're working on, focus on how you can help and how that aligns with the needs of the people you're reaching out to. Showing that alignment, even as early as in your initial outreach message, is going to completely transform. It's going to change the kind of feedback you're going to get. And this goes not just for outreach by sending messages and emails. It also goes, it's also applicable to conversations that you have with people. If you want to get noticed by people in the conversations you have, say at local chapter events of organizations you are a part of, ask about what they are working on, what their needs are for those activities they are working on, and how you can help meet those needs. Or you can even suggest that you can meet those needs by mentioning that you have expertise in certain areas, and then see how these people respond. That is the overall attitude, the overall perspective you want to take when doing outreach, both in in-person conversations and in online conversations with people through messages and email. So those are just two things that I wanted to cover. Anyone have questions? And in the meantime, I can also briefly go through some of the resources that I share through my paid newsletter. So as part of my paid newsletter, you will get access to my profile building opportunities database, which is what you're seeing right now. It's a spreadsheet of hundreds of profile building opportunities that I've categorized by criteria that I've listed out, and I've broken down. Seems like my screen stopped sharing. But yeah, going back to the profile building opportunities database, which we'll get access to as part of my newsletter. So there are hundreds of opportunities in the spreadsheet broken down by field. And these are just the kinds of opportunities that you want to be going for to start building your profile. And they're more like starting points, because once you get involved in some of these opportunities, you'll start to meet the kinds of people who are involved in other kinds of activities who could then refer you to profile building opportunities. So think of these opportunities as starting points for profile building. Something else you get access to are reviews of AO decisions. These are decisions that go into USCIS's reasoning behind EB-1A, EB-2, NIW, and O-1. They go into why USCIS initially denied an EB-1A, NIW, or O-1 petition. And from these decisions, I share profile building insights. And I review these decisions occasionally. And something else you get access to are video resources. These are recorded conversations with EB-1A recipients, and I ask the questions that I get all the time, like how someone claimed leading a critical role, how someone claimed original contributions, how to put together strong reference letters. These are the kinds of questions that I get all the time that I have asked some of these EB-1A recipients. Something else you get access to as part of my paid newsletter is my private group, as well as the group chat within the newsletter, where people have been actively sharing opportunities with each other, because there are a lot of leaders within professional organizations within the group chat of my newsletter. I've also been seeing a lot of people work together on papers, on articles for technical publications. They have been sharing collaboration requests, and I've had people tell me that they've been able to find co-authors for papers, contributors to book chapters, and they've been able to work together on a lot of authorship opportunities. So that's something I've been seeing a lot of in my private group. So yeah, that's just a bit about my newsletter. But anyone have questions, feel free to ask questions in the chat. Not asks. Would it raise eyebrows if UOCIS sees most of the activities are all within a few months when we are profile building? That is something that could potentially come up. Yes, UOCIS has questioned profiles on the basis of sustained claim. It's not necessarily the right standard, but there is a lot of subjectivity when it comes to the standard of sustained claim. So yes, that does come up. So that's why sometimes some lawyers will tell you to try to do things within 6 months to a year instead of 2-3 months. But you can also just go for it if you have, say, the sustained acclaim element within, say, your leading critical role. You have had years of working within a leading or critical role context. Then in that case, then if that's something you are not concerned with and you are fine with, then as in fine with getting questioned potentially, then of course you can go 3 months. But if you are concerned about getting questioned on the basis of sustained claim, then it's probably best to try to profile build for 6 months to a year at least. Shelley asks, please share some free materials to build your network. So that's something you can see already in a lot of my posts. I do share quite a bit of resources about this, but yeah, perhaps I'll put together a guide within my LinkedIn newsletter about how to build your network for EB-1A. It honestly just comes down to outreach. It's essentially what I'm doing as well. So within my newsletter, what I am doing is I am constantly reaching out to people who have access to the kinds of opportunities that people will want to get access to. And it just takes like 50 to 100 messages and emails a day. That's the kind of threshold you want to be going for. If you really want to get access to peer review opportunities, to authorship opportunities, to conference speaking opportunities, it's just going to come down to hundreds of messages a month. And then probably like 20 to 30 phone calls a month where you actively present how you can directly help the person you have reached out to. And it comes down to also understanding how you can help them. If you don't really include that in the conversations you are having, you can have lots of conversations and still get no profile building opportunities. Because what an opportunity really is it's just a way for you to help with your expertise and get recognized for it. And if you can't show how you can help because you don't understand how you can help, because you don't understand what these people need, then you will probably not get any profile building opportunities. But yeah, for those kinds of materials, you can just look at my LinkedIn newsletter. I talk about outreach all the time. And if you're interested in co-authors, in collaboration requests, and getting access to some of these industry people who are in these professional organizations, you can find them within my private group, which is a part of my paid newsletter, which is $12 per month. Vignesh asks, does conducting interviews, 100 plus interviews for various roles at FANG tier companies count towards judging criteria for EB-1A? No, but this does count towards leading a critical role because you're showing that you have a high level of expertise, so high that you have been tasked with conducting these interviews. So it could count towards leading a critical role, but it probably will not count towards judging. Ankar asks, how many research papers would one need to start getting peer reviews and mentorship opportunities? You don't need research papers to get peer review opportunities. You just need to do a lot of outreach. Outreach as in go to, say, IEEE conferences, go to IEEE's or ACM's conference calendar, go to each conference, go to the committee section for each conference, and reach out to everyone who is listed on that page, showing what you can offer, how you can help, and what you think they potentially need in terms of experts to do peer review. 9 times out of 10, you're probably not going to get a reply. But when you do get a reply, that could in itself lead to peer review opportunities. And I say this because I've seen this actually happen. I've seen people do outreach, and so much outreach, that they've been able to even get onto these conference committees. Like, I've seen this within my newsletter. Someone actually reached out to a conference that I had listed in my profile building opportunities database, an IEEE conference, and he was able to join the program committee through that email. So, and it just comes down to probably what most people experience as a problem when profile building. It's not really a skills problem. It's not like they don't have the expertise. It is just that they don't have the visibility from the right people. Like, they could be strong experts in a field that is in demand. They just don't have the right visibility and the right referrals to get into certain opportunities. And that is also a problem I'm trying to solve within my newsletter by, on my end at least, reaching out to as many people as possible who have access to these opportunities. I can help solve this visibility problem for a lot of very top professionals who probably don't have time to send out hundreds of emails and messages a week, but just need that visibility. Like, they're highly qualified. They just need the right people to see their credentials. But yeah, there's no specific threshold. You can just start getting peer review opportunities. Mentorship opportunities depends on the kinds of mentorship you're talking about. If it is just mentoring for professionals, then you can just get those if you can just get involved in the right organizations to get those. You can get into IEEE and then try to get involved in their volunteer program, and their volunteer program sometimes has mentorship opportunities. Or if you want to start mentoring people for research papers, if that's specifically what you want to get into, then it's probably going to come from either knowing professors or getting involved in the right research conferences on their committees. I'm sure there are plenty of other ways, but those are the two ways that come to mind. Anyone else have questions? Something else that comes up pretty often now, I'm seeing a lot of people do, is review book chapters. So perhaps a lot of these publishers are starting to look at industry professionals to help review book chapters or contribute to book chapters. Definitely seen this happen in AI a lot, where there's been a lot of interest from publishers in getting people to contribute book chapters, specifically people who have practical experience with AI. So that's something I've been seeing. So if that is something of interest to you, you might want to start speaking to some publishers. You might want to start speaking to publishers who are interested in working with industry professionals. Same goes for industry conferences. A lot of industry conferences, they have not industry conferences, but a lot of research conferences now have industry tracks. They're starting to include industry professionals in the papers lineup. So that is definitely another place to go for authorship opportunities as an industry professional. Jim asks, as for the publication, how to differentiate formal publication versus blog and article. So one standard is that this is based on something that a lawyer told me a couple of days ago. Something looks like a blog or article. Like, if something looks like a blog, even if it's not a blog, USCIS still might interpret it as a blog, and as a result, not weigh it as heavily as, say, a research publication. Usually the standards, the markers I look at are, is this publication published by a technical professional organization? A professional organization that has a strong technical base. And you can see that based on who is a part of this organization, who is on the committees, who's running the organization. So something like IEEE, for example, is probably going to pass that test. And that's why anything associated with IEEE tends to be weighed heavier than anything that is not able to show a strong technical base. That is one way to think about this distinction between formal publications versus blogs and articles. Look at the organization that is in charge of publishing the article. Nandita asks, how many hackathons peer reviews are enough? It's not really about the number of peer reviews in hackathons. Even one example can be enough to meet the judge role criterion. I would say 2 to 3, but it really depends on the quality of the hackathons and peer reviewing you're doing. But if you have 2 to 3 examples of judging, you might want to start focusing on other criteria that you're targeting as well, instead of doing more judging, because judging is one of the more straightforward criteria to meet. You can meet it on a plain language level and be able to get it granted. Krupal asks, working as a manager for a team of 5 to 6 research scientists at Pharmaceutical Institute can be considered as evidence of participation, either on a panel or individually as a judge of the work of others in the same or allied academic field. Seems like you are doing this as part of your work, as part of your job, so no. Might help with leading a critical role, but you might want to show examples of judging that are outside of your work at your company. Yeah, you're welcome, Jay. Someone messaged me with a question. What is the number you have to be targeting when it comes to reaching out to judging peer review opportunities per week? Don't think there's a number of opportunities for you to target. It's more about the number of people you reach out to. And yeah, at the start, it's going to be very outreach heavy. That's what I've seen. And it's quite common for people to ask this question of like, what do I need? Like how many opportunities do I need to be targeting a week? Well, the reality of profile building is that most opportunities are actually not publicly visible. It's not like they're just like floating around everywhere. There's no like, there's no list of people you can just target automatically. You're going to have to identify these people. And I do try to help with this as much as possible, but you're going to have to identify the people who have access to these opportunities. I think it's more about getting in touch with the right people. How many of those people do you want to be getting in touch with per week? And I think 2 to 3 is plenty. If you can get 2 to 3 people, say you're going for hackathon judging. And this is something that I'm speaking from personal experience too, because again, I'm doing a lot of this outreach as part of my newsletter. I've been able to get in touch with several hackathon organizers. They're literally organizers. They're able to organize hackathons because they have access to companies who are interested in working with them. They have access to startups that are interested in getting their products reviewed. They have access to a massive audience that is willing to participate in this review process. So getting in touch with these kinds of people and showing that you are able to help them, because judging is a big component of these events, showing you can help them. How many of these people do you want to get in touch with a week? 1 to 2, maybe 3. That's plenty for getting access to the right opportunities. And that is the approach I personally take. And I've been trying to introduce as many of these people as possible to people in my newsletter. That is what you want to be doing. Getting in touch with the people who have access to the right opportunities. And that doesn't come down to the quantity of opportunities you're able to target, but more so how many people who are well connected in your field, how many of those people are you going to be able to get to vouch for you and refer you to opportunities? In fact, just getting like 5 of these people to refer opportunities to you every month, let's say they just refer 1, that's 5 a month, which is quite a decent number. Anyone else have questions? Also, for those of you in my newsletter, if you aren't able to find people to work with, just ask me and I can introduce you to people. I'm trying to put together a spreadsheet. There is this spreadsheet right now, but I don't think people are really filling it out. But there's a spreadsheet right now within my newsletter resources that documents every single person in the newsletter, and they're able to describe their background, and it's for people who want to work with other people. But if you do need an introduction, just let me know. Ankar asks, is it recommended to have the employer sponsor the O-1 EB-1 visa, or would hiring your own attorney services be a better option to increase one's chances? From what I've heard, O-1 is employer driven, so they're probably going to want to hire a lawyer for you, probably the one they are working with already. But there are employers who will allow you to hire your own lawyer. For EB-1, it is completely driven by you. Of course, you can tell your company about it. From what I've heard, that is. You can tell your company about it, or you can just hire your own lawyer and apply for EB-1A. EB-1B and EB-1C, I believe, are different, but EB-1A you can drive on your own. I don't know the answer to your second question. Would hiring your own attorney be a better option to increase your chances? That is not. That's a question. There's no one answer to that question. ER asks, I am just starting to build my profile. I am a DevOps engineer cloud. Don't have any research articles, publications, citations, pens. Do I need them? Do you need research articles, publications, citations, pens? If you plan on targeting original contributions or authorship, and authorship more likely than original contributions, unless you already have some sort of original contributions claim. For authorship, you probably will need articles. Doesn't have to be research articles, but probably technical magazine articles. At the very least, you can publish professional publication articles, but those could get questioned depending on how they look. Citations are not needed unless you are presenting a research-focused profile. Patents are definitely not needed for authorship. They could be needed for original contributions, but it depends on the criteria you are targeting. Anyone else have questions? Any other questions? Oh yeah, for those of you here, I am hosting an O1 EB-1A insight session on Wednesday with someone in my private group who got approved for EB-1A and O1. And she was able to present a very strong judge role claim. So if that's something of interest, definitely sign up for that event, which is a part of my newsletter. Ignash asks, on hackathons for judging criteria, do college hackathons sponsored by major companies in the field count, or is it discounted by USCIS as judging the work of students? Judging the work of students is typically not considered for the judge role criterion, simply because students are not considered as professionals in your field. So you will want to go for industry hackathons, as in hackathons that involve industry professionals. Anyone else have questions? Anyone else have questions? What all things satisfy peer review judging criteria? Judging, if you want to meet judging, you'll want to look at anything where you can show that you're judging the work of other professionals in your field. That could be peer reviewing. That could be judging hackathons that involve industry professionals. The reason why I say peer reviewing is because it's literally mentioned in the policy manual that peer reviewing is counted as judging. So that's why peer reviewing can be a very strong form of judging evidence. Outside of that, you could be reviewing open source contributions for a project. You could be reviewing startup pitch competitions or pitch competitions in general. You could be reviewing applications for technical committees that you are a part of. You could be reviewing, I think in the policy manual, it even says you could be reviewing PhD theses as part of like a dissertation committee. So there are quite a few examples of judging. Don asks, is getting a national scholarship only given to selected candidates based on performance in a particular field for MSc considered an award? Probably not. It really depends on, let's pull up the policy manual. So the first standard you're going to have to meet, okay, were you the recipient of prizes or awards? Yeah. Now, you need to show that the award is a lesser nationally or internationally recognized prize or award which the person received for excellence in a field of endeavor. So you need to show that this award, this scholarship, is considered a lesser nationally or internationally recognized prize. Now, the reason why scholarships can be difficult for this standard is, and it even says here, while many scholastic awards do not have the requisite level of recognition, it's literally saying most scholastic awards do not have this level of recognition. And it's because they are probably not considered nationally or internationally recognized. Now, you can always make the argument, since you're saying national scholarship, you could argue that it is a national award. It's just that showing that it's because of your you're also going to show that it's because of your field of excellence. It's because of excellence in your field of endeavor. So there are a couple of things you're going to have to show here. It's not traditionally the kind of award that would help you get the awards criterion, but you could try. Also, awards in general is difficult to meet. It's not really a criterion that industry professionals at least like to target. I mean, I know that industry professionals always ask about awards, but it's just not typical to get awards in your field as an industry professional. I mean, some people do get awards, but not a lot of them don't. Even very senior professionals. Yeah, so if you look here, while an award open to members of a well-known national institution or professional organization may be nationally recognized. So if you can show national recognition for the award and it was because of excellence in your field of endeavor, then perhaps you could use that as an award. But traditionally, it's just difficult. Simply because you're getting the award may not have been for excellence in your field of endeavor. Because again, that could get questioned. Like if you're an industry professional, your field of endeavor is not going to be as a student of some subject. It's going to be for your work as an industry professional. So that's where you could get questioned. All right, last question, Nihar. Since I am a DevOps engineer, computer science, does having AWS certification, CCNA, CUBE should not count towards awards criterion? Probably not. It's difficult to argue that unless you can show, like this is where you could get questioned. You could get questioned on the field, the field of endeavor aspect of things. Excellence in the field of endeavor. So with the awards criterion, there is a lot of subjectivity when it comes to what excellence in the field of endeavor means. Some officers could argue that, some officers could think that you have to have like this really high standard where maybe you stood out of like tens of thousands of other professionals for this award, and that's why you got the award. That is their standard of field of that is their standard of excellence in their field of endeavor. So it's not exactly the most compelling evidence, but again, it depends on how selective was this award and how strong is the evidence you have to show that these certifications demonstrate excellence in your field of endeavor. Because if it's just run-of-the-mill certifications, then probably not going to be as compelling as, say, an award that only gets granted to like 50 engineers out of thousands every year. Steve asks for a tech industry professional, Would scholarly articles be equivalent to tech articles accepted by publications such as Medium publications, and high-profile journals? How many? Not Medium publications. For EB-1A, definitely not Medium publications. High-profile journals, yes. How many? It could be 1. It could be 2. 1 is enough. It's just that if you get questioned on that one journal, then you have nothing to fall back on. So perhaps 2 at least. There is no threshold that will help you grant the authorship criterion. You could get authorship simply on the basis of 1 published article that is high quality in a journal, not in Medium. So I would say 2 to 3 is what I usually tell people. Is applying to O1 and EB1 at the same time advisable? Also, how much of an additional effort criteria is needed to get the EB1 compared to the O1? Now, that depends on your personal immigration situation, so you are going to want to speak to a lawyer about that. Now, as to the difference between EB1 and O1 and the effort required, O1 is a far lower standard than EB1A. EB1 there are like 3 variations of EB1: EB1A, EB1B, and EB1C. So if you're talking about EB-1A, then the standard is much higher for EB-1A. That being said, you can reuse a lot of the evidence as presented for O1 for EB-1A. Nana asks, some IT certifications grant you membership to an association. For example, Microsoft Certified Professionals, does this count as membership of association? Not really, because there's the subjective element to the membership criterion. It is outstanding achievements. You need to show that the membership that you claim requires its members to have outstanding achievements. Now, how you argue that is going to be the difficult part, because if it's something that people just automatically grant you, then no. Yeah, if you automatically get it, then no, it's not really going to count towards the membership criterion. Niar asks, Kubernetes Kubeshana is a very well-known award given to people who excel in container space. Right now, there are only 160 members in the entire USA who has this, whereas other countries have more. Okay, in that case, then perhaps you could make an argument for how this is given to people who have excelled in your field of endeavor. Yeah. As long as you can back that claim up, then perhaps it could help with the awards criterion. Why are Medium articles accepted by high-profile publications such as Towards Data Science be not qualified compared to a high-profile journal, given that both have review accept processes? Well, the reason is because USCIS does not like things that look like blogs for some reason. There seems to be an academic slant within USCIS such that officers seem to like research publications and publications tied to top research professional organizations instead of things that look like blogs. It's just a bias that some lawyers have shared with me. I mean, there's nothing to say that you cannot use these professional publications as evidence. You can. It's just that it could get questioned. I'm not saying it will get questioned. I'm just saying it could, because there's this bias against things that look like blogs, whereas there's less of a bias towards, say, IEEE technical magazines, ACM technical magazines. Anyone else have questions? All right, I'll answer a few more questions. Yeah, anything that looks like a blog, anything that is unfamiliar media, like podcasts, like YouTube channels, for some reason get questioned by USCIS. Now, if you can overcome their line of questioning, then yeah, could get accepted. It's just that you should be prepared to get questioned on that evidence. And I guess some people just don't like to get questioned on the evidence they present. So if given a choice, they tend to prefer to get to show evidence that they know will be less likely to get questioned. And that is why people tend to publish in IEEE magazines. How can I work with you directly to build my profile? Also, can you please give me your intro as I found you a few days ago in LinkedIn? Feel free to message me on LinkedIn and feel free to schedule a profile building call. That is what I currently do with working with people directly. I mean, I have worked with some people one-on-one in the past, but I haven't really been doing that as often nowadays. I've been more so just doing more profile building calls so I can help more people on an individualized basis. And I've also just found that it's not as useful for people to, I mean, I guess it depends on the person, but just feel free to reach out to me and we can set up a profile building call if you would like help. So just message me on LinkedIn. Can you combine 2 or more weak points to gain the criteria, like 2 national awards that are not the strongest? No. So there's this assumption that you can just combine low quality evidence. And again, nothing is definitive in this space, in that it's not like you can just you can submit low quality evidence. You can do all these things that people tell you not to do, and you can still get a criterion. It's just that, generally speaking, combining low quality evidence is not how you meet a criterion. That is why publishing like 50 papers that are very low quality could still get you questioned. It's possible to still get the criterion. It's just that if you're asking if this is the approach to take, you would rather get a very high quality award than 2 not very high quality awards. Because think about the kind of argument you're trying to make with EB-1A. You're showing how you have risen to the top of your field. So shouldn't you be presenting evidence that shows that you're risen to the top of your field? So would you rather then present 1 award that shows that you're risen to the top of your field, or 2 awards that don't really show that you're risen to the top of your field? Because if you do the 2 not very high quality awards, then you're not really advancing your overall argument that you're risen to the top of your field. And some officers may then take the approach of your awards, and this is not, again, necessarily the correct standard, but from what I've heard from lawyers, some officers will look at each individual criterion and apply a mini final merits analysis. And they will look at each individual piece of evidence and ask, have you risen to the top of your field based on this piece of evidence? And if the answer is no, then your criterion gets denied. So unless it's vastly easier to get these 2 low quality awards, you should instead just focus on 1 high quality award and just use that to claim the criterion. What patterns of mistakes do you normally see for those who fulfill criterions but fall on final merits? The main mistake that I have seen is just not really taking the leading or critical role or original contributions, or both, seriously. As in not really taking seriously your anchor criterion. The foundation of your profile is probably not going to be built on authorship or judging or any of these supplementary criteria. It is going to be built on a foundational criterion, usually leading or critical role or original contributions, or both. So if you just kind of check that as a box instead of really thinking about how your leading or critical role, say, shows that you're risen to the top of your field. And this sounds straightforward, but it takes a lot of time to find the right references, to collect the right evidence, to work with your lawyer, who also has to understand your work. All of this takes a lot of time. But you have to get all this right in order to be able to show a strong anchor criterion. And that anchor criterion can be enough to help you meet final merits. That's something that a lot of people don't really take seriously enough. So that's a common mistake. Thinking that leading a critical role, I've worked here for like 10, 20 years, so of course I have leading a critical role. I'm just not really going to care about my references. I'm just going to go like spam papers and judging instead. But when you haven't really presented a compelling case narrative, that's where things could fall apart on final merits. I'm not saying they will. I'm just saying that when people don't take their anchor criterion seriously, when they don't take the reference letters seriously, when they don't really think. Also, another thing is, and this isn't as common, but it could happen. If you have a strong anchor criterion, but you focus on low quality activities for judging an authorship, that could take away from the narrative that you're presented that you have risen to the top of your field. Because the assumption is if you have risen to the top of your field, you should be able to focus on high quality activity. You should be getting these activities because you're a high level expert. If you don't get these activities, that's a question mark. That's a, why is this person not getting any of these activities? They're supposed to have been able to get some of these activities because they've risen to the top of their field. That's a line of questioning that could lead to like the falling apart of final merits. Because you're essentially saying, I've risen to the top of my field. All this is showing a claim, indicates that I've risen to the top of my field. Oh, but I have these like low quality journals and I have these like low quality judging opportunities. It's almost, you're essentially saying I wasn't able to land anything else. So that's where there's also that, when in fact it could just be because you didn't really do the outreach. You didn't really do the applications to get those higher quality opportunities. You just kind of maybe went like the shortcut route and got someone to like guarantee you low quality opportunities. That could be it. That's another very common mistake. Nana asks, how does USCIS know the quality of a journal? Is there a quality? How does USCIS know the quality of a journal? Is there a quality list we can check? No, there's no list. You have to make the argument for whether something is quality. It's, with anything, you're the one in charge of presenting an argument. It's not like you're just going to, like that's with any evidence you present. Don't expect USCIS to do the thinking for you, do the contextual analysis for you. You're going to be the one, you're supposed to be the one to present the quality of evidence. Then by your logic, having judged 5 to 10 opportunities always looks better, as this individual gets invited multiple times, so despite no defined threshold, more is better for final merits. More high quality is better for final merits, not more. That's why I said getting 50 low quality papers is not that great. But if you got invited to like 5, 10 top hackathons for like New York Tech Week, and like A16Z invited you to judge this like venture capital competition or something like that, and you're just getting these opportunities like every single month, and you're getting invited to like the top incubators to judge, that's much stronger as evidence, because you're getting all these top names, you're getting invitations from them. That's what could help with final merits. Final merits is, again, about showing how you have risen to the top of your field. Your achievements have to indicate that you have risen to the top of your field. Getting high quality invitations, getting involved in high quality organizations, yes, that's strong final merits. Would you say it just boils down to strong evidence then quantity? Yes, it boils down to strong argument then quantity. Quantity is not argument. Quantity is a list. A list doesn't automatically argue anything. Whereas an argument is, this is what I've done, and this is what it shows. A list is, here are like 100 different things I've done. Maybe one of those things will show I have risen to the top of my field, but I'm not going to say anything about any of them. I'm just going to list everything out and just kind of like let you draw the conclusions. So yeah, a strong argument based on strong evidence matters far more than quantity. Anyone have questions? Any other questions? Being explicit in the evidence is AIs needed? Is all that's needed? Well, you need to create a narrative around your profile. That's what you need to be doing. It's about a narrative. It's about an argument. It is also not about just shouting over and over again that you have risen to the top of your field without really unpacking what that means. You have to create context. You have to create comparison. You have to show, out of the tens of thousands of professionals who have done this exact thing that I've been doing, I have risen to the top of those professionals because of this, this, and this. And this is how. Thanks. So you're a lawyer, by the way. No, I'm not a lawyer, but I do work with several top immigration lawyers, and that is where my profile building insights come from. What can we do for final merits? What you can do is strengthen your leading and critical role, strengthen your original contributions claim if you have an original contributions claim. Don't just try to claim it if you have no original contributions. What can you do? Well, you can focus on the highest quality evidence and highest quality activities. Focus on activities that show that you've risen to the top of your field. So go for the highest quality, say, judging opportunities, the highest quality authorship opportunities, especially opportunities tied to your level of expertise in your field. That is what you need to be doing for final merits. Showing that your achievements indicate that you have risen to the top of your field. All right, there's another question. Someone messaged me. How does hosting a workshop in a related working field compare to presenting a paper or speaking at a conference? Depends on the workshop. Presenting at a conference. Presenting a paper at a conference or speaking at a conference is always a great way to get noticed by top professionals in your field. A workshop could also do the same, but presenting a paper at a conference could also help you get published in that conference's journal. So that is something to take into account. But I think both are good. It really depends on the workshop. It really depends on the conference. And asks, if I go to a tech event and meet with other industry leaders, would I tell them if I'm trying to network to build my profile? If you go and meet these industry leaders, you'll want to ask about what they're involved with. Ask about the committees they have joined, the advisory boards they have joined, the organizations they have joined, the events they're trying to organize, and then say, I have this expertise as well, or I know someone with this expertise, or ask, oh, that's really great that you're involved in these organizations. How can I contribute? How can I help you? How can I help you grow this organization? How can I help you organize this conference? And they might tell you, oh, we're actually looking for more speakers. We're actually looking for more judges. We're looking for more committee members with this specific background. And then if they really had a good conversation with you, they will ask, do you know anyone who has this background? And if that is you, then you can say, oh, I have this background too. I have this specific skill set. I have this expertise, and I can help you with this specific thing because I have this, this, and that expertise. And then they might say yes, or they might say no. But you can say, but if I am not the right person for the opportunity, I do know people who could help you. And that is how you maintain that contact, because you actually help them in some way, even though it didn't directly benefit you. So when another event comes up, when something else comes up, they will think of you because you helped them. That is what you need to be doing. Do that 1,000 times, and you will probably start getting opportunities every single week, every single month. And I say this because there are people in my private group who have done this hundreds of times and have been getting so many speaking opportunities that they have been unable to take on any more speaking opportunities. They are actively declining speaking opportunities. I know at least 2 people in my private group who have gotten to this stage. Actually, more than that, but 2 people that I know of that I've spoken to. All right, I'll do a couple more questions. Another question for EB-1A: Can you give an example for software engineering or AI that can satisfy the exhibition criteria? I cannot, because I have never seen anyone satisfy this criteria in these fields. Because it's artistic exhibitions. All right, I'll do just a couple more questions. And again, as some of you are interested in working with more profile builders, there are quite a few of them who are doing a lot within my private group, which is part of my newsletter. Anyone else have questions? Any other questions? And yeah, if some of you are looking at O-1, a lot of this applies to O-1A. It's again about showing how you've risen to the top of your field, but it's not really showing about how you've risen to the top of your field. As in the top 5% of your field, more like top 20 to 25%. Anyone else have questions? All right, just one last thing I'll cover is it's all about your case narrative. It's about showing how you've risen to the top of your field. You should be essentially telling a story to USCIS for what you have done throughout the many years you worked in your field. It doesn't even have to be your field. It can be like a general occupation. That's just something to keep in mind. It can be a general occupation. It can even be a skill set that you have, like a technical skill set. Like a lot of you are contractors, for instance, and you worked in multiple companies because of this relationship that your contracting company has with many different US organizations. You may have been contracted out probably because of your expertise in a particular technical skill set. So you can argue on the basis of that skill set. So it's all about building a narrative. It's not about being in a specific domain. It's not like tech cases are favored over like other kinds of fields. It's about showing how you've risen to the top of any field. And you can define field as occupation. You can define you can show that you've risen to the top of a general field. You can show that you've risen to the top of a niche field. It's just how you structure things. It's about creating that argument to show that you have risen to the top of your field. And the less questioning you get, the more you minimize the number of questions you get by not including sketchy evidence, by not including shady activities, the more likely you are to get through without just getting questioned. So that's just something to take into account when building your EB-1A profile. It is about an argument, about a narrative. Also, just always focus on quality, because if you focus on quantity, what you could end up doing is including lots of low quality opportunities that could open up lines of questioning that you probably don't want, especially if you already have a strong anchor criterion. the last thing you would want is to get questioned simply on the basis of some shady judging activity that you did when everything else is extremely strong. So that's just something to keep in mind for EB-1A profile building. Right, so I don't see any other questions. So thanks everyone for joining today's live stream. All right, everyone. Feel free to start asking questions about EB-1A profile building. And I can also share a bit about some of the topics I've been coming across. So one topic that seems to come up all the time has to do with peer reviewing. A lot of people want to learn about how to get involved in peer reviewing. And for the most part, it just comes down to the kinds of people you reach out to, the kinds of people you start conversations with. And usually I suggest that you look at reaching out to conference committee chairs, especially conferences that have an industry track. So lately I've been noticing that a lot of conferences have been offering industry tracks. They've been more open to submissions from industry professionals. And that is probably why they're introducing industry tracks. So for these kinds of conferences that have industry tracks, you will see that a lot of them have program committees for their industry tracks. And you'll see a bunch of industry professionals who are on these committees. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to email or message or both, and as in message on LinkedIn, you'll want to email and message them to see if you can get involved in peer reviewing. And how you want to approach that is you want to reach out, share the expertise you have, talk about the expertise you have, and then show how your expertise is relevant to the conference, especially to the kinds of topics that the conference is looking to cover within its industry track. So you'll want to make sure that your expertise aligns with what the conference needs from industry professionals who are interested in submitting a paper or a workshop presentation. And then you'll want to make sure that the people you're reaching out to are aware that your expertise aligns with their needs. So it's just going to come down to reaching out to lots of these program chairs. And you can also expand your outreach to people who are not involved in the industry track review process, but could potentially introduce you to those committee chairs. And it's probably going to take, like 20, 30 messages a day. I think that's what you should be targeting if you really want to make significant progress when it comes to outreach. You need to be hitting these kinds of numbers in order to have outreach actually be effective for you. It's just going to come down to 20, 30, 50 messages even if you really want to make faster progress on getting peer review opportunities for judging. So that's just something to keep in mind. And another thing that has come up a lot is a lot of people want to learn about how to find speaking opportunities. And a lot of people, I see a divide here. Some people just land so many speaking opportunities that they just can't take on any more speaking opportunities. I have come across a lot of these people. A lot of these people in my private group too. And one person actually came to me and said that he was getting so many speaking opportunities that he just couldn't handle them. And then you see a bunch of people who haven't even gotten one speaking opportunity and want to learn about how to get their first speaking opportunity. And again, it's just going to come down to outreach. And I say this because I have seen people do this quite effectively, and just through outreach alone have been able to meet so many people in their field that they are now automatically considered even for upcoming speaking opportunities, simply because of the number of people they've met and the kinds of people they've been meeting. So if you want to land more speaking opportunities, again, it's just going to come down to doing a lot of outreach, and it's not going to be as obvious who to reach out to, but something to still look into, which is quite similar to conference speaking, as in research conference speaking, is to target the committees and organizers of industry conferences. You can reach out to them, start a conversation, and again, show how your expertise aligns with the needs of the conference. That is, again, something you can do, and the benefits you could potentially get from getting these speaking opportunities is not only the evidence you could potentially present that shows that you have a level of expertise that indicates that you've risen to the top of your field, especially if you're speaking in front of the very top professionals in your field. You could also start to land independent references through speaking opportunities. You could meet people who you end up just staying in touch with, who have never worked with you, but are industry leaders. Again, this is completely based on someone I came across in my private group who was able to land independent references simply by speaking at multiple top conferences. A lot of these industry leaders actually followed up with him afterwards, and he was able to keep in touch with them and eventually land independent references through them. So that's just two things that seem to be coming up a lot, come up all the time, and people just keep asking, like, how do I land peer review opportunities? How do I land speaking opportunities? It's just going to come down to the kinds of people you start meeting at, say, local chapter events. It could also be people you meet people you meet through outreach. You can just reach out to people online. So yeah, just a lot of outreach, a lot of starting conversations. That is what it takes to land speaking and peer review opportunities. And feel free to start asking questions if anyone has any. So in the meantime, I can also go through some of the newsletter resources that I have as part of my paid newsletter, which is $12 per month. One resource that I have been continually updating is my profile building opportunities database. This is a database of opportunities that are relevant to people in multiple fields. I've been trying to share opportunities for fields outside of tech as well, but mostly tech. So AI, data science, you'll see down here, AI, data science, data analytics, software engineering, cloud computing, product management, just these fields in general, I've been sharing opportunities for. And these are just opportunities categorized by the relevant criterion or criteria. And I have been hearing from a lot of newsletter readers that they've been able to actually land some of these opportunities. They've been able to speak at some of these conferences. They've been able to publish in some of these research conferences and publications as well. So yeah, this is my profile building opportunities database, which I continually update. Something I also share as part of my newsletter resources, and I occasionally do this, is I review AAO decisions. These are appeals decisions that go into USCIS's reasoning for initially denying an EB-1A petition. And they go into how USCIS thinks about EB-1A, and they also cover EB-2 NIW and O-1 as well. And from them, I share profile building insights. I'm also sharing a lot of video resources. That is something that I've been doing within my newsletter. And this is, again, just part of my newsletter resources. These are just conversations, recorded conversations with EB-1A recipients. And I ask the questions that a lot of you ask me, like how to put together strong reference letters, how to claim leading a critical role, how to claim original contributions. So those are just some of the resources that I'm currently sharing. There's also a private group, and as well as a group chat within my newsletter, where people have been able to find co-authors and collaborators. Just quite a few opportunities are coming up in that group chat because I've been seeing professional organization leaders join the group as well, and they're sharing opportunities actively. So just to give you a sense of some of the organizations that people have joined and are leaders in. So I've seen people from Informs, for example, who are on committees and are actively sharing opportunities within the group chat. And a lot of people have told me that they've been able to find co-authors. A couple of people actually got published in IEEE conferences with the collaborators they found within the group chat. And yeah, something I'm also starting to schedule more of is workshops. So these are so there's one coming up next week. It is going to be an insight session with someone in the group who got approved for both EB-1A and O-1. So that will be an insight session scheduled for next Wednesday at, I believe, 8 p.m. Eastern. I'll also be hosting a session with an IET fellow because a lot of people have been asking me about the IET fellowship. And I'm also speaking to a BCS fellow next week to see if there might be insights to share about the BCS fellowship based on my conversation there. And yeah, I'll be scheduling more of these workshops within my paid newsletter in the coming weeks, especially with people who've been able to build strong EB-1A profiles. But yeah, that's just my newsletter resources. So Naga asks, what memberships are considered by USCIS in recent days? I heard that senior IEEE is not considered in recent days. Is that true? Yes, senior membership is not considered as part of as strong evidence for the membership criterion. What is considered? Well, there are many different forms of membership you can claim. You just need to show that the membership requires outstanding achievements of its members, and that is something you're going to have to define as part of your argument. There is no specific definition for outstanding achievements. But the forms of membership that tend to work better than IEEE senior membership are committee positions, industry advisory boards in general. Some of these are like university advisory boards. I've also seen people claim certain fellowships as strong evidence for the membership criterion. A lot of people like to claim BCS and IET if you can get those fellowships, but they are difficult to get in general, especially IET. So it's not like they're just readily accessible, but they are strong evidence for membership. I think for tech, the more common ones that I've been seeing are, most common examples I've been seeing are IEEE committee positions, journal editorial board positions, IET fellowship, BCS fellowship. Those are the kinds of memberships that I've been seeing as part of the membership criterion. Rav asks how membership in Forbes Tech Council can help. So based on what I've heard, it's not the strongest type of membership that you can claim. It's because it's become very common, and I think the bylaws have something to do with it, but it could help if you can argue that outstanding achievements are required for members of the Forbes Tech Council. It's just that given how many people are a part of the Tech Council, this is just based on what I've heard, that could be difficult to claim. That being said, you can still land other types of opportunities through this membership. It doesn't have to necessarily meet the membership criterion. You don't even need to claim the membership criterion. It's not like you have to claim the membership criterion. It helps if you have compelling memberships, but if you don't try to force the membership criterion. You can try to claim judging and authorship, which tend to be the more straightforward criteria than membership. And just claim membership if you actually have strong membership evidence. Otherwise, don't try to claim it, especially with just senior membership within IEEE. Not saying that senior membership is not useful. It is useful for IEEE, especially in getting leadership positions and getting more opportunities in general. I'm just saying that it's not compelling evidence for the membership criterion. Phage, I think I'm pronouncing that right. Phage asks, can we apply for EB-1A without publications? Yes. If you don't plan to claim the authorship criterion, you do not have to publish. That being said, if you are open to publishing, authorship is one of the criterion you will want to target, because authorship tends to work on a plain language level. It's accepted, it's usually interpreted on a plain language level, as in the officer tends not to add their own interpretation to the criterion. There's far less subjectivity with authorship, so it is one of the more straightforward criterion. It's, however, if you don't want to publish anything, you don't like to publish articles, you don't like to publish journal articles, you don't like to publish in conferences, then perhaps authorship is not something you want to look into. But yes, you can apply for EB-1A without authorship. Some people do that. They apply with judging, high salary, leading a critical role. Sometimes they add on membership as a fourth, but sometimes they just leave it at a third for judging. How many journals or how many memberships do we need to have to fulfill the criteria? This is a question that comes up all the time. There is no set number. It depends on the strength of your argument or the strength of the argument you want to present for a certain criterion. If you have a very compelling membership, let's say, I don't know, you're part of some advisory board within your field that has transformed the field, that membership on its own could already help you meet the membership criterion. And it will just come down to whether you think that membership is strong enough, or are you comfortable with claiming that criterion simply on the basis of that one piece of evidence. And if it is actually a strong membership, if you have actually transformed your field with that advisory board position, going with the example I just mentioned, then by all means go for it. It's not like you need to tack on more memberships. That could be a strong argument on its own. Same with journals. If you have one journal article that is in a very influential journal that has gotten a lot of traction from people in your field and is respected by people in your field, and you can show evidence for all of that, then one journal article could actually be enough. It just comes down to, are you comfortable with claiming authorship on the basis of one journal? Because what you will have to then keep in mind is that if the officer does not agree that that one piece of evidence qualifies as authorship, then you don't get the criterion at all. So probably 2 to 3 examples is what I would go for, assuming you have the time to go for, say, 2 to 3 memberships. But I would still prioritize quality over quantity. I would much rather have one high quality membership than 2 to 3 just decent quality memberships. Again, it depends on like how everything fits into your overall argument as well. And yeah, there's no specific number. 2 to 3 if possible. But if you're comfortable with one, just use one membership or one journal article. Does USCIS accept patents from other countries? Yes, but you will have to think about how those patents fit into your overall profile. If they're just patents that you just randomly filed, that are not in use, that have not gotten any traction, that have not gotten any significant attention, then they're probably not going to be useful for your profile. But if, say, you filed some patents because you used to work in another country, and then now those patents are being used by companies in other countries, and that's how it relates to your work right now in the US, or maybe you don't work in the US, you work outside of the US, then yeah, by all means, those could actually be useful for your profile, and they would probably get accepted. Sharif asks, how many judging gig is the minimum required? There is no minimum. You can have one judging opportunity and still be able to meet the judge role criterion. It just comes down to what comfort level you have with just presenting one judge role opportunity, because as I said, if you get denied on this one single example of judging, you have nothing to fall back on. So then, is that something you're okay with? Like if you've won like the most prestigious fellowship, if you have the most prestigious fellowship in your field, then I would say it's not really required to have more memberships. So it just depends on like what kind of evidence you have for judging and whether you're comfortable with presenting it as the only example of judging, knowing full well that you could get, it could just be rejected by an officer for like no reason. Like you just don't know, in which case you have nothing to fall back on. So at least one, probably 2 to 3, but probably not 20. But it depends on the kind of profile you're presenting. Like for a researcher, if peer reviewing is like absolutely fundamental to your field, then having 20 peer review opportunities is probably normal. It also depends on the kind of case you're trying to present. But if you're an industry professional, judging 50 hackathons is probably not going to be that useful for your profile. After the second or third one, it's probably not necessary to just keep presenting examples of judging, especially if they're not very high quality opportunities. Anyone else have questions? Any other questions? Yeah, this number of opportunities question just comes up a lot. I just don't think it's that relevant in general, because it's more about the strength of your argument. Like, how strong of an argument do you want to present? And does that argument require you to have multiple opportunities? Like, how many opportunities do you need to present a strong argument? Not really how many. What kinds of opportunities do you need? Like, would you turn down a high quality opportunity? I don't think that would make sense, simply because you felt like you already have enough judging opportunities, unless you're really getting totally overwhelmed with high quality opportunities. A premier member of your group. There's a lot of information being shared by you and group members. Thank you for giving the valuable information. Yeah, you're welcome, Naga. And again, feel free to message me with questions, and this goes for all of you. And if you need introductions to certain people, I'm open to doing that as well. There are a lot of people in that group, so I just want to make sure that everyone is comfortable navigating the group. And if you need certain introductions, there's like some sort of spreadsheet within the newsletter resources that I need to update. It's meant to be a list of people within the group, but I don't think everyone has introduced themselves within the spreadsheet. But I'm planning on updating that spreadsheet soon, getting people to list out who they are so that everyone can just have like one single spreadsheet to refer to for the people in the group. So you can find like co-authors, membership opportunities. But yeah, what's been happening in the group is that a lot of people have just been working with each other, and a lot of them are just doing a lot of work. They're doing a lot. They're trying to get published in journals. They're trying to get published in technical publications, and they're actively working with people in the group, finding co-authors and putting together drafts and sharing a lot of information and actually getting published. Paige asks, what figure qualifies for high earner criteria? Depends on your state. Usually it is the 90th percentile base salary. That is one way to argue high salary. There are other ways to argue high salary. You can include total compensation potentially, but that vastly increases the range. So some people just rely on base salary to make this argument. 90th percentile, you can look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you can look for your particular state and occupation. That is one way to argue high salary. Oh yeah, one other thing is you can also argue high salary on the basis of a job offer. You don't have to argue on the basis of a salary you currently earn. It's just something to keep in mind. Anyone else have questions? Right, no other questions. I have a couple more minutes. But yeah, it just comes down to doing a lot of outreach. That's the one unifying thread I've seen for pretty much all strong profile builders, including ones I work with. All of them just have a really strong inclination towards reaching out to people. I mean, I'm sure there are other ways to build a strong profile, but this is the way that I have seen help people land opportunities that weren't even publicly advertised in the first place. Like, I've seen profile builders just reach out to conference organizers, even though there was no call for speakers, and end up actually getting to speak. So that is just one example that highlights the importance of outreach. Anyone else have questions in the last couple of minutes? All right, if there are no other questions, thanks everyone for joining today's